It's funny how life slips into a rhythm, a kind of predictable comfort that numbs you to the small details. That's how it was with Amy and me. Our relationship wasn't fireworks, but more like a steady burn. We both had kids from previous marriages, no children together, though, and we were on our second round at trying to make a family work. Blended families are a tricky thing, especially when neither one of you has the energy for the high stakes of starting fresh. Still, we managed. The kids got along fine mostly, and Amy and I were the adults in the room. I'd met her at a work conference, of all places. She was smart and easy to talk to, with this contagious laugh that always seemed to break up the seriousness of any situation. Amy was the kind of woman who could make you feel like the most interesting person in the room, even when you knew you were boring the hell out of her. She had that charm, like a magician waving a handkerchief to distract you from what was really going on. I guess I was a sucker for it, thinking it meant something deeper. We both had decent jobs. I worked in insurance sales, the typical 9-to-5 grind. Amy was an administrative assistant at the local school district, which gave her the flexibility to be home when the kids got back from school. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable, stable. At least, that's what I thought. In hindsight, it's easy to see the cracks forming, but at the time, everything just seemed normal. Routine. We didn't argue much. There were no heated fights, no slammed doors or wild accusations. Maybe that's what made it all the more jarring when everything fell apart. It started with these little changes. Amy was always busy more than usual, like she had endless errands or meetings that couldn't wait. She'd come home late, smelling faintly of something different, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't perfume, but it wasn't her usual scent either. Just off. I chalked it up to stress. I mean, working in a school, dealing with students and teachers, that stuff could wear anyone down, right? I wish I could say I noticed more, that I wasn't so blind, but the truth is, I was distracted, caught up in work, trying to make ends meet, juggling our finances like some sad little circus act. I wasn't paying attention the way a husband should. Maybe if I had been, things wouldn't have gotten so bad. Then there were the phone calls. Short, clipped conversations that she'd take in another room. When I asked who it was, she'd wave it off. Just work stuff, she'd say, her tone light, but the flicker in her eyes told me there was more. I never pushed, never had a reason to. Amy was independent, always had been, and I figured she was just handling things in her own way. We'd been through enough together to build that kind of trust, or so I thought. But something felt off. Deep down I knew it. The late nights, the constant texting, a sudden need for space. It was like she was pulling away, but not in a way that screamed trouble. More like a slow, deliberate withdrawal. I told myself it was just a phase, that we'd come out of it like we always did. Couples go through ups and downs, right? Still, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling, like a weight pressing against my chest. Every time I caught her smiling at her phone, or making an excuse to be out longer than expected, I brushed it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. After all, Amy had never given me a reason to doubt her. She wasn't the type to cheat. Hell, we had both been cheated on in our previous marriages. If anyone knew the pain of betrayal, it was us. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Looking back, I wonder how much of it was my own doing, how much of her growing distance was my fault. Maybe I was too focused on the day-to-day, too buried in the mundane to notice her slipping through my fingers. At the time, though, it just seemed like life. Busy schedules, tired evenings, the occasional date night that felt more obligatory than exciting. We were two people surviving the grind, building a life on routine and obligation, unaware of how fragile it all really was. I didn't know it then, but everything was about to change. Things between Amy and me never felt dramatic. Our marriage was like that, a quiet kind of understanding, like we'd both been through enough in life to know that not everything had to be a battle. It's strange how you can live side by side with someone for years, sharing the same bed, the same routines, yet feel miles apart without even realizing it. We had our good days. Every now and then, Amy and I would go out for dinner, laugh like we used to, and I'd remember why I married her in the first place. She had this way of looking at me when she was relaxed, like we were in on some private joke that only the two of us knew. But those moments were fewer and farther between now. They were becoming rare enough that when they happened, I clung to them like some kind of lifeline, reassuring myself that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. I started noticing little changes in Amy that felt off, like a puzzle where the pieces didn't quite fit. She had become more distant, more distracted. There were times when I'd talk to her, and I could see her lips moving, hear the words, but they never really connected. It was like she wasn't there with me, not completely. It was the small things at first, things you'd hardly pay attention to unless you were looking. She began dressing differently, putting more effort into her appearance, even when she didn't have anywhere important to go. I remember one Saturday morning when she spent an hour getting ready just to run errands. She didn't say much about where she was going, just gave me that practiced smile and headed out the door. I told myself not to overthink it. We'd both grown up with a certain amount of independence, and I figured she was just doing what she needed to do. Still, a part of me couldn't help but wonder if it was more than that. Was she bored? Lonely? Or maybe she just needed space, something I wasn't giving her, caught up as I was with work and the day-to-day grind. The phone became her constant companion. I'd catch her texting late at night, her screen glowing in the darkness while I lay beside her in bed. I'd ask her about it, and she'd say it was nothing, just work, just friends. But the way she'd turn her body away from me, the subtle shift of her posture, made me feel like there was something she didn't want me to see. The distance between us grew. We weren't fighting, there was no explosive argument, no slammed doors or dramatic confrontations. It was quieter than that, almost unnoticeable, like a slow leak you don't realize is happening until everything is soaked through. I'd come home from work, and Amy would barely look up from her phone. Our conversations turned into these clipped, surface-level exchanges. How was your day? What do you want for dinner? Did you pay the bills? The things married couples talk about when they're no longer really talking. Even sex became mechanical. It wasn't something we did often, but when we did, it felt like we were going through the motions. There was no passion, no connection, just another item on the to-do list. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, that it would pass, but deep down I knew better. You don't just lose that kind of intimacy unless something is wrong, really wrong. I started paying closer attention. There was one night, in particular, that stands out, one of those moments that sticks with you because you know, right then, something shifted. Amy had come home late. She had this wild energy about her, like she'd been somewhere exciting, doing something that made her feel alive. She was flushed, her hair a little disheveled, her eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I asked her where she'd been, and she gave me the same tired answer: work ran late, she had to stay behind for a meeting. But the way she smiled, that coy little smile she used to give me when we were first dating, it was like she was smiling for someone else now. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, the way she seemed lighter, happier. But after she went to bed, I picked up her phone. I'd never done that before. Never felt the need. We had always trusted each other, or so I thought, but that night, something inside me snapped. I had to know. The phone was locked, of course. I stood there staring at it, feeling a mix of guilt and desperation wash over me. What was I even looking for? What was I hoping to find? After a few minutes, I put it down. I wasn't ready to go there. Not yet. The next few weeks were a blur of trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, that Amy was just stressed, that her late nights and secretive phone habits were normal. But deep down, I knew better. I'd been down this road before, in my first marriage, and the signs were all too familiar. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was pulling her away from me. It wasn't just the distance between us that bothered me, it was the way she seemed happier now, lighter, like there was something or someone filling the space I no longer occupied. Then there were her absences. She'd started working late more often, or so she said. I'd come home to an empty house, the kids off at their activities, and find myself alone, wondering where she was, who she was with. When she did come home, she always had an excuse, some vague reason for being out so late, but she never offered any real details. The distance between us kept growing, this invisible chasm that I couldn't figure out how to cross. We'd sit across from each other at dinner, our conversations as empty as the space between us, and I'd wonder what had changed. Was it me? Was it her? Or was it something else entirely? It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Everything was moving toward disaster, but I couldn't stop it. I didn't even know how. And then came Cody. I'll never forget the day Amy finally said his name out loud. Cody. It hit me like a freight train, though I guess it shouldn't have. The signs had all been there, creeping in slowly until they were impossible to ignore. But hearing her say it, hearing her actually confess it, that was a whole different kind of pain. It was late, and we were sitting at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared countless meals, birthdays, family talks about the future. But this time the air between us was thick with something heavy, something dark. I knew something was coming. You could feel it, like a storm about to break. Amy looked different, more nervous, fidgety, her fingers tapping on the table. Her eyes darted around the room, never really landing on me for more than a second. I need to tell you something, Cliff, she said, her voice soft, almost fragile. That was the first red flag. Amy was never fragile. She was tough, resilient, the kind of woman who could handle anything life threw at her. But here she was, looking like she was about to break apart. I didn't say anything, just waited, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, my hands gripping the edge of the table, bracing myself for whatever was about to come next. Part of me didn't want to hear it, didn't want to know what I already suspected, but the rest of me needed to. I needed the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. There's someone else, she said, barely above a whisper. Just like that, my world stopped. It wasn't the first time I'd been here in this moment. My first wife had cheated on me, too, and when I'd caught her, I thought it had shattered me beyond repair. But this was different. This was Amy, the woman I thought I could trust, the woman I'd built a life with, after we both swore we'd never go through that kind of betrayal again. It was like the universe had played some cruel joke on me, leading me right back to the same damn place. Who? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, though my insides felt like they were on fire. She paused, biting her lip, her eyes still avoiding mine. His name is Cody. The name alone made me sick. Cody, just the way she said it, soft, almost affectionate. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep it together, trying not to let the anger boiling up inside me take over. I wanted to shout, to rage, to throw something, but instead, I just sat there, frozen, waiting for her to keep going. He's a teacher, she continued, her voice shaky now. I met him at work. He's young, Cliff, younger than me, younger than us. Younger. Of course. That stung in ways I wasn't prepared for. I could feel the bile rising in my throat, but I swallowed it down, determined not to show her how much this was gutting me. How long? I asked, my voice barely holding together. A few months, she said. It started slow, just talking at first. But then she trailed off, looking down at her hands, twisting the wedding ring around her finger like it suddenly didn't fit. But then it became more. I finished for her, my voice hollow. You've been sleeping with him. She didn't have to say it. The answer was written all over her face. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the way her whole body seemed to deflate under the weight of it. Yes, she whispered, and that one word was like a knife to the gut. There was a long silence between us, the kind of silence that stretches out forever, when neither person knows what to say next. I sat there staring at her, trying to process what I'd just heard. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode, but I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, stunned, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. Why? How could she do this to me? To us? I didn't mean for it to happen, Amy said, breaking the silence. I swear to you, Cliff, I didn't plan this. It just happened. Cody, he makes me feel. I don't give a damn how he makes you feel, I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. I could feel the anger rising in me now, bubbling just below the surface, ready to spill over. You've been sneaking around behind my back for months, Amy, months. While I've been here busting my ass, thinking we're fine, thinking we're a team, you've been fucking him. She flinched at my words but didn't deny it. She just sat there, her eyes filled with guilt, maybe even a little shame, but not enough. Not nearly enough for what she'd done. I love you, Cliff, she said quietly, like that was supposed to make it better. I still love you. This thing with Cody, it doesn't change that. My laugh came out bitter, sharp, full of disbelief. You love me? Is that supposed to make this okay? Do you even hear yourself right now? I don't want to end our marriage, she said, her voice trembling now. I don't want to lose you. I know I've made mistakes, and I'm so sorry, but Cody, he's different. He makes me feel alive again, like I'm not just going through the motions anymore. I could barely breathe, the rage and betrayal choking me from the inside out. So what? You think you can have us both? Is that it? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was answer enough. You want to keep seeing him, I said, the realization hitting me like a sledgehammer. You're not asking for forgiveness. You're asking for permission to keep fucking him while you stay married to me. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a second, I almost felt bad. Almost. But then the full weight of what she'd done hit me again, and all I felt was anger, raw, burning anger that made my whole body tremble. I don't want to lose you, Cliff, she whispered, the tears spilling over now, but I don't want to lose him either. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. My wife, the woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was sitting across from me, asking to keep her affair going like it was some casual fling, like it wasn't tearing me apart. Well, guess what, Amy, I said, my voice cold and hard. You don't get to have both? After that night, nothing was the same. How could it be? The words Amy had spoken, the admission of her affair, echoed in my mind constantly, like a song stuck on repeat. Cody, the young, hotshot teacher who had somehow become the center of her world. Every time I thought about it, I felt sick. And not just because of the betrayal, though that alone was enough to gut me, but because she had actually believed she could keep us both. The days after her confession passed in a blur. We didn't speak much. Amy tried, I'll give her that. She made awkward attempts at conversation, asking me about my day, suggesting we sit down and talk things through. But what was there to talk about? She wanted to keep seeing Cody. I wasn't going to let that happen. That's not how a marriage works, at least not any marriage I wanted to be in. I couldn't look at her without feeling that burning pit of anger in my stomach. Everything she did, every move she made, was tainted by the knowledge of what she'd done behind my back. She'd walk into a room, and all I could see was the image of her with him, Cody. I imagined them together, laughing, touching, fucking. The mental pictures haunted me every time I closed my eyes. I couldn't escape it. It didn't help that Amy seemed to be in denial about the whole thing. She acted like we could somehow just work through it, like this was a bump in the road, rather than a full-blown collision that had totaled everything we'd built together. She even brought up counseling once, but I shut that down immediately. What the hell was counseling going to do? No amount of therapy was going to make me okay with the idea of her being with another man. The worst part, she was still seeing him. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. There was no sneaking around, no excuses about late meetings or errands. She would just leave, sometimes without saying a word, and I knew exactly where she was going. She didn't have to tell me. The look in her eyes when she walked out the door said it all. The first time it happened after her confession, I sat there in stunned silence. I had half a mind to follow her, confront them both, maybe even knock Cody's teeth down his throat. But what would that solve? The anger boiled inside me like a volcano ready to erupt, but I kept it in check, for now. Instead, I threw myself into work. It was the only place I felt like I had any control left. The office became my refuge, a place where I could drown out the chaos of my personal life with meetings, client calls, and stacks of paperwork. My boss noticed the extra hours I was putting in and asked if everything was okay at home. I lied, of course. Told him Amy and I were just going through a rough patch, nothing out of the ordinary. He nodded, gave me a sympathetic look, and let it go. But inside, I was anything but okay. One night, after she'd left for another one of her dates, I finally lost it. I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the kitchen, poured myself a glass, then another and another, until the numbness started to creep in. But no matter how much I drank, it didn't drown out the image of them together, didn't wash away the hurt or the betrayal. I ended up sitting on the couch in the dark, staring at the empty space where she should have been, my mind spinning in 1,000 different directions. What the hell was I supposed to do? Leave her? Stay and pretend like everything was okay? Was I supposed to just accept that my wife was in love with another man? By the time Amy came home, I was drunk, angry, and ready for a fight. She walked in quietly, like she was trying not to wake me, but I was wide awake, the whiskey coursing through my veins, fueling my rage. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked, my voice slurred but sharp. Amy froze in the doorway, her hand still on the doorknob. She looked at me with a mixture of guilt and defiance, as if she knew she was in the wrong but didn't care enough to stop. That was the thing about Amy, she could look sorry. But it was like she wasn't really sorry. Not deep down. "Cliff, it's late," she said, her voice tired. "How can we talk about this in the morning?" "No, we're talking about it now," I snapped, pushing myself up from the couch, stumbling slightly as I did. The room spun for a second, but I steadied myself, fueled by the fury burning inside me. "Do you think I'm some kind of idiot, Amy? You've been out fucking him again, haven't you?" Her face crumpled, but it wasn't enough to stop me. "Cliff, please, let's not do this right now." "Why not? What's wrong with right now? You don't get to come home after being with him and just act like everything's fine," I yelled, my voice cracking with emotion. "You think you can have us both? You think you can just waltz in here, pretend like nothing's happened, and we'll go back to normal?" She didn't say anything. She just stood there, her eyes cast downward, her lip trembling like she was on the verge of tears. But I didn't care. I was past caring about her feelings. I had cared for months. And where had that gotten me? Right here, in the middle of this shitstorm she'd created. "I can't keep doing this, Amy," I said, my voice breaking as the anger started to give way to something deeper, something raw and painful. "I can't keep sitting here, waiting for you to decide what you want. You've already made your choice." "No, Cliff, I haven't," she said, her voice small now, pleading. "I don't want to lose you." I laughed, but it was bitter, hollow. "Then why the hell are you still seeing him?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth was too obvious. "Do you even care about what this is doing to me? To us?" I asked, my voice cracking with the weight of it all. "You say you love me, but every time you walk out that door, it feels like you're driving a knife deeper into my back." Tears rolled down her cheeks now, but I was too far gone to care. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words felt empty, like they didn't mean anything anymore. I stared at her for a long moment, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built a life with. But in that moment, she felt like a stranger, and I knew, deep down, that things were beyond repair. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice cold and final. It wasn't a question. It wasn't up for debate. I was done. Amy's eyes widened in shock, as if she hadn't seen this coming, as if she really thought we could keep living this lie. "Cliff, no, please, let's talk about this. We can fix it, I promise. I'll stop seeing Cody." "It's too late," I interrupted. "You've already destroyed everything." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. But it didn't matter anymore. I was done with the lies, the betrayal, the endless cycle of hurt. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. The divorce wasn't as dramatic as I had imagined it would be. Once I told Amy I was done, things moved quickly. It's amazing how fast your life can come apart when there's nothing left to hold it together. She fought it at first, tried to plead with me, begged for forgiveness, even swore she'd never see Cody again. But by then, I didn't care. Her words meant nothing to me anymore. The damage had been done, and no amount of apologies was going to fix it. We filed for divorce within the week. The paperwork was a blur, splitting assets, signing away years of our life together in neat little boxes. It was ugly, but not in the way you'd expect. There were no screaming matches, no custody battles over kids, no public blowouts, just a quiet, bitter unraveling of what we once had. The lawyer handled most of it. I made sure to go after everything I could: our house, our joint accounts, even her retirement fund. I wasn't looking for revenge, but I sure as hell wasn't going to walk away empty-handed while she ran off with Cody. And that's the thing, she didn't even run off with him. Once the divorce was in motion, the fantasy between them fell apart. Cody wasn't interested in dealing with the messy reality of her life. He wanted her when she was still someone else's wife, when it was exciting and forbidden, but as soon as it got real, as soon as it required commitment, he bailed. I found out from a mutual friend that Cody had been seeing someone else on the side, a younger woman, of course. Apparently, Amy didn't see that coming. When she tried to confront him, he shrugged it off, told her he didn't want anything serious. So much for making her feel alive. I won't lie, part of me felt a sick sense of satisfaction when I heard that. Amy had wrecked our marriage for a guy who couldn't even bother to stick around once the thrill wore off. It was karma in its purest form, watching her world fall apart the way mine had. But even with that small victory, I couldn't escape the bitterness that lingered inside me. The court ruled in my favor on almost every front. Amy didn't walk away with much, and by the time the dust settled, she was out of a job too. Word got around about her relationship with Cody, and when the school found out, they let her go quietly. They couldn't have a staff member involved in something like that. Amy tried to rebuild her life after that. She bounced between jobs, picking up temp work here and there, but it was clear she wasn't the same person anymore. Her confidence, that spark she used to have, was gone. I heard bits and pieces about her from mutual acquaintances, how she had to move into a smaller apartment, how she started drinking more, how she'd become a shadow of who she used to be. It wasn't until years later that I saw her again, purely by accident. I was at a restaurant downtown, grabbing dinner with some colleagues. We were celebrating a big sale I'd closed that week, and I was in a good mood, feeling like my life was finally back on track. The divorce was long behind me, and I had started dating again, nothing serious, but enough to remind me that life goes on. And then I saw her. Amy was sitting alone at a corner table, staring blankly at a half-empty glass of wine. She looked older. Not just physically, though that was part of it. There were more lines on her face, her hair was dull, and she had this tired, worn-out look about her. But it was more than that. She looked defeated, like life had finally caught up to her. The vibrant, confident woman I had married was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I should go over or just pretend I hadn't seen her. But something in her expression, maybe it was guilt, maybe it was sadness, made me get up and walk over to her table. "Cliff," she said softly when I approached. Her voice was thinner, weaker than I remembered. She looked up at me with those same eyes, but there was no spark left in them, just regret. "Amy," I replied, standing there awkwardly for a moment before sitting down across from her. We hadn't spoken in years, and now, here we were, like ghosts from a past life. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How have you been?" "I've been good," I said, and I meant it. "Work's going well, I'm still at the same place. Sold my house, moved into a condo downtown. It's good." She nodded, but the conversation felt forced, like we were both trying to avoid the elephant in the room. I could tell she was struggling to keep it together, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted her glass of wine to her lips. "I'm sorry," she blurted out suddenly, her voice breaking. "For everything. For what I did to you. I never meant. I didn't think it would end like this." I watched her for a moment, letting the words hang in the air between us. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear those words from her, to have her admit what she'd done and ask for forgiveness. But now, sitting across from her, all I felt was nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even relief. Just a kind of numb acceptance. "I know," I said quietly, "but it's done. We've both moved on." She looked down at her hands, her eyes welling up with tears. "I lost everything," she whispered. "I thought Cody. I thought he was something he wasn't. I made the biggest mistake of my life." There was a part of me that wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, that people make mistakes, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. She had made her choice, and we both had to live with the consequences. "I'm sorry it turned out this way," I said finally, standing up to leave, "but I'm not the person you need to apologize to anymore. Amy, you need to figure that out for yourself." She nodded, wiping her eyes, and I turned to walk away. As I left the restaurant, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter, and I didn't feel like a victim. The betrayal, the hurt, the years of pain, none of it mattered anymore. I had come out the other side, stronger, wiser, and ready to move on with my life. Amy, on the other hand, was still stuck in the past, haunted by the choices she'd made, and as much as I wanted to feel sorry for her, I couldn't. Life moves on, So had I.